Oh, that's my music playing in the background. Good morning, Stephen.
Nice.
I'm like,
The
why is
morning
that
is
still
kind of a
playing?
little bit different. Hello, Michelle. Hello, everybody who's joining us today and afterwards via YouTube. I'm Stephen Feuerstein, Michelle Scamini, here from Insum, and I'm here to share my latest Feuer tips. And oh boy, what a Feuer tip we've got about declarations in PLSQL. But first, let's just feel kind of miserable about the overall state of the world, okay? Oh.
It wouldn't be Feuertips if we didn't have to start by bumming everybody out.
Right. And as bad as it is with a 70-degree new world record of Antarctic heat wave, Putin's war in Ukraine, really, Will Smith, did you really have to do that? Oh.
Stephen, you stole my line. And good morning, Graham, again, joining from Singapore. That's awesome that you're here with
Very
us.
nice of you, Graham. And I stole your line. Oh.
You stole my line about, yeah.
Right, we'll come up with another one really,
Will
really
Smith
cool.
and punching Chris Rock. Yeah, that was something.
So, all sorts of nasty stuff going on, which is why I love to talk about software. It's our own escape from the horrors of the civilized world, the manufactured world, into our own specially super manufactured cyber world. So we're going to talk about declarations. Then we're going to talk about one of my favorite books. In terms of organizations, we will again support the people of Ukraine as they fight against the bully Putin, who has been asked directly on television by Donald Trump to interfere in the next presidential election. The guy is just amazing. Okay, moving on. So let's talk about declarations.
By the way, this is important. You're apparently wearing the same shirt as Brian. So
nice, Brian. And we have the same color beard too, more or less.
Yes, you do.
Some of it. Right. So pretty much whenever you write a piece of PLSQL code, any code, you're going to need variables or constants or new types to get your job done. And I was working with some folks at Insum on a project recently and realized that there were some things I might want to share with you about things to do with declarations. So I put together a bunch of scripts. We're kind of going to run through them. I'll give you guys some quizzes along the way, and I'll even take my time and give you time to respond. So let's dive in. Please share my screen, Michelle.
No naming and shaming, Stephen, right?
Oh, yeah, no. We were looking at my code. It was crap. We can shame me, right? I'm allowed to do that, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, so starting nice and simple, here's a little tiny anonymous block just to point out some basic things about declarations. So when you declare a thing in PLSQL, you give it a name, you specify the type, you can give it a default value in most cases. You have to do your declarations of variables and constants and types before you start declaring subprograms. But take a look at this code. So the basic idea here is I'm really lazy. I'm going to come up with really bad names of variables. I'm going to come up with, well, it's a string, so I guess I just might as well declare it to be the largest string possible just in case. I did a session on programmers insurance years ago. It seems like years ago. I guess it's 1 year ago, more or less. And if you ever find yourself saying, I'm going to do this just in case or just to be sure, you're almost certainly introducing suboptimal code, maybe even a bug. So you really don't want to write code like this, and we'll go exploring alternatives. Next up, a curiosity about PLSQL. So take a look at this code. This is a quiz. Time for you to respond. So here's a procedure called show one, because it shows one. And it declares a couple of variables, a number variable and a date variable. So what do you think? Does that look weird? And the biggest question is, will this code compile?
Okay, give them a chance to answer. Put in the comments, will this compile?
I'm not going to answer, Michelle, until you tell me it's time to answer. How's that? Because I have zero discipline when it comes to this. I'm very bad with silence. In fact, I'll just keep talking the whole time.
Guys, quick. Will it compile? All right, I guess you can go. And we'll see. Okay. Comments will come in. We're not very good with dead air, right? All right.
Well, I think it's also that people know I'm just going to play a trick on them. So, of course, everybody should say,
a trick question.
Of course it's going to compile. Now, when you look at that piece of code, you would say to yourself, how can that compile? It's got two variables with the same name. Surely that's no good. Well, let's try it. I think answers are coming in, right?
They are. Everyone so far thinks it will compile.
And we got a warning from Stephanie, warning unused variables. Ooh, I like that. Here, let's see if my warnings are turned on. Since I've talked about how it's important to use them, I've got only performance enabled. So let's turn all that off. Let's turn all of my warnings on. Okay, so now we're going to try to compile this program. Now it's, I think, reconnecting. Sorry. Do we have any? Everybody says yes. Yeah, it's just 2. Oh, we got 1. It will, because the double variable. Oh, Judith, I'm not gonna say what you wrote. We'll put up your answer later. Come on, SQL dev. All right. Well, this will compile, and then we'll look at some other variations that may or may not compile. Thank you so much. Okay. So now I'm going to compile. And I get, what? You're not supposed to give me an error. Wait a minute. Clear that. Do it again. There we go. Okay, so Stephane, you are absolutely right. If I turn on warnings, I get a warning that I have a duplicate previous use of L variable conflicts with this use. So if I have warnings turned on, then it tells me that I've got an issue, but my code compiles. Let's take it further. Try to compile this code. No problem. Again, just a warning. Notice I've got L variable that's used here, but this L variable is this one and not any of these. And then finally, let's try to compile this code. And now I get a PLS. And most one declaration variable is permitted, and a warning. Previous use conflicts with this use. So here's the funny thing about duplicate variable names. You'll only get an error if you try to use it, but you can declare all the duplicates you want. Well, that's kind of silly, but I guess not a big deal. So now let's go into some tips and best practices. Okay. So I don't know about you, but when I review code, the first thing I do is look for patterns. So I'll tell people in some, send me a package. I don't care how big it is. I just sweep through it and look for things that catch my attention. When I look at code like this, what catches my attention is the pattern. Let's do the old block editing. I love it. See the repetition? Oh, there's some more repetition. So what you see here is this person needed to work with all these different variables. So this person declared all the individual variables, everything they needed, and then started working with it in their code. I won't even talk about all this kind of stuff and what I might try to do with it. But the bottom line is that when you see this kind of variable declarations, I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot of time spent declaring all those things. And what if I need to add a new one that I have to go in, or let's say another column is added to the table that I need to work with, I need to add a new declaration and so on. Whenever you see this kind of repetition, usually the best way to get around it is to use one of several people's favorite features in PLSQL, which is %row type and %type anchored declarations. So now I just have L account. I declare it to be the same structure as a row in the table. Number of fields match number of columns. Data types in the fields of the record match data types in the columns of the table. Voila. So now I've greatly reduced my declaration section. And if another column is added, it'll automatically be picked up by the declaration, whether or not I use it in this procedure. So you could say, well, I might end up with a declaration of 100 fields I don't need. Not usually that big a deal, but there are ways to get around that too, which I'll talk about next. So look for these patterns and identify opportunities for %row type. Speaking of %row type, so suppose I've got the select statement and I'm selecting a few different values. And so what I'm going to do is declare an individual variable for each one. And it's, in a way, it's quite similar to this, but it's a shorter list. So you're not talking about hundreds. Now, the thing is, I'm not selecting star. So I can't declare row type. In this situation, where you don't want to have to declare multiple variables, but you're not going to be using %row type, you can't. What you can consider doing is moving your select statement into the declaration section as an explicit cursor. You can even do it really right. And you can give it a parameter. That's what I should do. And then I say, open the cursor. Oh, I'm sorry. Then I declare a variable, a record, based on the row type of the cursor. So it's the same thing as the table definition, but I've localized it to this cursor, which allows me to subset the columns that I want to work with. So again, if I have a table with 1,000 columns and I only need 5 of them, you probably don't want to do a %row type, especially if PGA memory is potentially a concern. So in those kinds of cases, you can create this subset through either an explicit record statement or a cursor. Cursor makes sense if you've already got the cursor of the select statement. Then in that case, of course, I'm changing from an implicit query to an explicit, so open and fetch. And then it really depends on what your application logic is here. What I said here was to match the behavior above. If it's not found, then I'll raise no data found, because the advantage, disadvantage, whatever the difference in behavior with an explicit cursor is the fetch will not raise no data found if no rows are found. If that's critical, you have to emulate it and then go ahead and do the stuff you're going to do. You can even be good and close your cursor, but as I'm sure many of you know, the cursor will be closed automatically when this block terminates. Just general garbage cleanup by PLSQL. Right, so this is a nice little tip to avoid having to declare all these different variables, but not relying on %row type for the entire table. Any questions or comments to look at there?
Nope, nothing new's come in, Stephen.
Okay.
By the way, if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to put them in the chat.
Great, thanks. And I see this one note from Rob, variable overloading, right? In a way, this is variable overloading, and it doesn't work. Okay, you've probably seen me talk about my string tracker package before in the context of nested collections and string index collections. And I want to go back and take a look at it from the standpoint of subtypes, a really nice feature in PLSQL. So in this package string tracker, I want to keep track of strings that are used. For example, I'm generating code. I don't want to declare multiple variables with the same name because, well, it might not work. So every time I generate a declaration, I store the fact that I use that name, L variable 1, L variable 2. And that's what this code is for. So I need to create a collection to store that information. So what I'm going to do is create a table of Booleans, which is table of Boolean indexed by varchar2. So it's a string index collection. I've got a record structure. Is my list of names case sensitive or not? And then the actual lists of the values, which are Booleans. So that's kind of weird, right? My list of values is Booleans. It's case sensitive or not, and the record is 2 fields. Then I end up with lots of 2 fields. It's a table of 2 fields, so more than one of these, indexed by string once again. And then I start doing my code. Now, I think that if I asked you to understand what this structure was all about, it might be a little bit of a struggle. I would have to put in comments. So I could do things like, don't care what the value is, only the index, which is the string we are tracking. So I can put in comments over and over again to explain what I'm doing here. But what I like to do is not write comments. Life's too short. If I spent all the time I should have, according to some people, to write comments on my code, well, I might have written a few less books than I did. So let's take a look at using subtypes instead. So obviously you can declare things with predefined types. These are all PLSQL system defined types, but I can also define my own special types based on existing types. Those are called subtypes. So a subtype is really just an alias. I can say max varchar2 is the biggest string possible in PLSQL. So I don't want to keep saying, if you need the biggest string, declare it as varchar2 32767. What if Oracle changes that at some point? So I'm just going to give it a name. Then I've got a couple of different subtypes that are really application specific. The name of my list is one of those max varchar2s, and the name that I've used is also one of those max varchar2s. So those are subtypes that essentially just give a name to the generic type, allowing me to improve my self-documenting characteristics of my code. I'll also declare a constant which says, it doesn't matter, the value doesn't matter, and a subtype, who cares? All right, with all of that in place, let's take a look at my modified declaration. Instead of this bland stuff that has no indication of what's going on. Now, my type used AAT, so it's really probably should be used names. Let's improve it as we go. Use names AAT is a table of who cares indexed by the used name. So think about it. I'm saying that this is a list of things that I don't care about, indexed by the name that I'm tracking, the name that was used. Okay, so then I use that in my list. So now I've got a list RT. This is actually an individual list, whether or not it's case sensitive, what are its lists of values, the values in the list. But notice there's no list name, which is usually the characteristic. Turns out that my list of lists, so I'm going to be maintaining multiple lists of different names under context, is a table of those list records indexed by the list name. I'd like to think that this now makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to keep track of my lists. I'm going to index by the list name. Within the name, I've got the list of the values. And I don't care what the value is. I just am using the name in the index. And then when in my code, I can also use the same subtypes in my parameter list and thereby make it more explicit as to what is going on. So instead of returning varchar2, I'm saying I'm returning one of the names that were used. My suggestion is whenever you find yourself saying, first of all, things like, well, I'm going to declare it as varchar2 32767 because I want it to be the biggest string possible. At least give it a name that describes what you just said and use that type instead. And try to use subtypes to come up with names that basically translate the generic type into an application relevant type that helps you explain your code. Okay, questions, comments?
Well, so I realized, Stephen, earlier that I think I had an issue with the refresh of the comments. So my apologies to Rob earlier about the variable overload, and I didn't see that. But around the same time when you were talking about your last use case, Stefan had a comment about when he closes the cursor. So what do you think about that? I often close cursor before do stuff after fetching. What do you think of that practice?
Why don't you share my screen and I'll go back over there. So that was that one, this one right here. So I did the close here. So what Stefan is saying is I usually do it. Well, first of all, you might say, let's do that, right? Open, fetch, close. That's a very common pattern. I can't do that here because I'm using the %NotFound attribute, which is dead after I close it. So I can't put it there, which means I would have to, if I wanted to be good about cleaning up. And again, it's not strictly speaking necessary here because Oracle will do it for us, but I think it's a good practice. I have to put it in both places. Again, no big deal. But those are the three different patterns. Close immediately after fetch if you don't need any of the attribute values from that fetch process or the state of the cursor. And then you'll have to close it in potentially multiple places if you have a branch, or do it at the end. I think that responds to the question. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Well, that's all I'm seeing. I hope that's the truth. I don't know if you're seeing anything that I'm missing. There's a little bit of a delay, a lag on my end.
Okay. Now let's go back and take a look at this one again. This idea of actually, I can do it right here. So this one, subtype max varchar2 is varchar2 32767. So what I'm saying is, in general, I never want to declare anything to be varchar2 32767 because it's a hard coding, and Oracle might at some point expand the value. Chances are, even if they expanded the value, I'd never run into the limit. But in any case, we want to watch out for hard coding. So as of 12.2, Oracle Database version 12, release 2, Oracle added support for using static expressions when you provide limits on data types like varchar2. Static expression is a value or an expression that can be evaluated at compile time, not runtime. So for example, this is a static expression. This would not be, let's see, to number, oh, no, it would be, I could do to number, to char, sysstate. Julian, right? Sysstate's not static. It varies with every execution. So that would be a non-static expression. You can't use that kind of thing inside, let's say, the limit size for varchar2. Let's go back to what I had. But you can do that. So right now, I can say that I've got a maximum length, 32767, and I'm going to use that right here, and I can use it in multiple places. Okay, so that's a new feature in 12.2. And also, let me see if I've got a script for it. Because you don't have to, for that max varchar2, you don't have to do that. Long identifiers, no, that's not it. So there are actually built-ins that you can use that specify the maximum size of an identifier. You don't have to hard code that yourself. No, that's maximum size of an identifier. I don't think there's a separate value for this. So in any case, you can declare it just one place, and then you don't have to do subtypes, but you can actually use them in your declarations themselves. So if you ever find yourself saying, oh, I don't know what to write here. Should it be 100? Should it be 1,000, 10,000? Make it a static expression. It can be a static expression based on some Oracle built-in provided value or your own values. All right, and I think that covers my tips on declarations for today. So let's see if we have any other comments. I'll turn off my stream. Oh, should have asked you to do it.
Yeah. Here, Niels had a comment earlier about don't forget to copy the %found attribute into Boolean variable.
Why? If you don't mind my asking, Niels. Let's go back to the code. So you're saying that I should do this. There. And then I guess I could say, so the advantage of that would be I could say close, and then if not found. So certainly I could do that. It's not clear to me what the advantages of
yes, that's what Niels is saying. It's if you want to close the cursor immediately after fetching.
Ah, cool. Okay, great. Right. So if you need the state and you want to close immediately, just grab the state in whatever variables as needed. Thank you. Thank you, Niels. From Farhan, is it more efficient to use subtypes where a primary type could be used repeatedly? For example, in your maxvarchar2 type, is it more efficient to use the maxvarchar2 type in the PLSQL type or varchar2 directly? The answer, Farhan, is that no difference whatsoever. This is compile time stuff. So that's why it has to be a static expression in general, and that indicates what's going on behind the scenes. At the time your code compiles, subtypes, static expressions, all that kind of stuff, all your pragmas, which are compiler directives, all that is resolved, and the code that you're actually running is, well, C code or something below that, whatever. I don't worry about the details. So yeah, it should not be any sort of issue in performance.
Then Anton is pretending like he doesn't already do this.
So Anton, for those of you who don't know, Anton is a senior. I'm not sure what his title is at Insum. He's one of my go-to people. Really, really sharp on SQL and PLSQL and Apex, and he makes these comments to indicate that I seem to have taught him something about PLSQL. Don't believe it a bit, but we go back and forth. I send him stuff, he sends me stuff. It's a really great way to work. But in general, it's true. Yes. So I'll announce today that if any of you need any code written, you can just write up the requirements and send it to me, and I will implement them for you.
Oh, that's quite the promise, Stephen.
What did I leave off the promise?
Sorry?
What did I leave off the promise?
So anybody can just send you any code. You'll just write it for them.
Yeah.
All right.
What did I leave off of that promise? When I would do it.
When you would do it and how much you would do it for? No? Just when?
I'll add it to my list. You're welcome, Farhan. All right. So keep the comments, questions coming, serious or not.
There.
No,
thank you.
No,
Anton
all right. Any code you want for free, I just will not promise to ever get back to you in a timely manner. So if you need it before like the third millennia, you probably should choose a different path.
Okay. And Brian, I echo that. I tell them that all the time.
All right, but now he's just aiming for his next promotion, which I have no authority over whatsoever. He may not be aware of that. Maybe I couldn't have said anything. So to sum up with declarations, there are some little weird things like multiple declarations. You probably never would have discovered that. It's the sort of thing I'm paid for. I don't know if I'm paid for finding that stuff out, but I have the opportunity to. The main thing is, and I didn't even focus on that much more going forward, come up with really good descriptive names. So you're not constrained to 30 characters. So you can make the names as long as you want. Don't make them too long, but 30 plus 40. I found it to be very handy. Have a good naming convention for your variables. I usually, and I think we at Insum use L_ for local, G_ for global, et cetera, all good stuff. Take advantage of subtypes. It's a really cool feature to make your code so much more readable. Right? We do want to put comments in our code, but they should be comments that add value after you've put all the meaning possible into your code. And look for those patterns. If you find yourself doing things and you're saying, there's got to be a better way than copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. There almost certainly is. I was doing a techno scrum that we do in Insum, short 15-minute tips like this one, recently on a similar kind of situation where there had been some copy pasting of code that I was able to consolidate. I actually cut a 1,200 line package down by 300 lines, which was fun. And, you know, you could look at that exercise and say, wow, that first pass by the developer, not very good. No, not true at all. So what this developer did was take some really complicated logic, technical specs, and he went through the first phase translation into code. So there were all these repeated things that needed to be done for different sets of data. And so basically he did copy paste for the first full elaboration of the implementation, which I think is very appropriate and quite justified. And then as a second round, you can come in once you've got it stabilized, it looks good, et cetera, then you can build a regression test script. Then someone like me can come in and whip it around and say, oh, we can take these lines and turn it into this procedure and call, and we can actually shrink the code, make it more reliable, more maintainable, run it through the regression test and know that there are no new bugs in it. So just because you're copy pasting doesn't mean it's bad, but it means at a minimum you should put a little star, you know, /* to do comment to say,
come back to this.
I might want to come back to this at some point, sooner rather than later. So I got it right. Question.
Noel had a question.
Right. So
good one.
Let's go back to my code for this one for a moment.
Okay.
And I know, you know, I'll ask this question, and I know that many of you have probably seen me ask this about 100 times in the last, what is it, 150 years I've been doing this? So the question is, var1 or var2, which one will consume more memory? Just by running this block of code, while the block is executing, before I've even put a value in it, which of these two variables will consume more memory? Anybody have an idea? I guess we're not doing great on time, so I'm just going to keep going. It turns out that this will consume more memory than this. So varchar2s are variable length strings, which means that when you declare them, it doesn't allocate the memory for all of that. If, however, I did this, a fixed length, this would allocate the 32,767 bytes needed for that variable, which is why you almost never want to use a fixed length declaration. But it also turns out that there's a little optimization that the PLSQL team has implemented, which says, look, if it's not a really big string, rather than incrementally allocate memory as needed, so I first assign 100, then you double the size of the string, so I have to allocate 200. It says for relatively small strings, and I believe it's still at 500 and higher, Oracle will pre-allocate all the memory. Versus anything higher than that, like this, which they say, well, there's no way we're pre-allocating that. And then it waits and allocates it dynamically. So first of all, the bottom line is that it's probably counterintuitive for most developers that these smaller strings could result in more memory use than these larger strings, depending on what you end up putting in them. But the second thing I would say is really, it doesn't matter that much. I'd say in general, don't worry about the length you're declaring. Chances are the memory that's allocated and used will not be significant in your application, obviously with exceptions. And the main thing is to use a value that's appropriate. And if it's something like this, give it a subtype. What else we got?
Thank you for the subtype info.
All right. So let's move on. We're almost at the half-hour mark. So my favorite book for today, share my screen, please. I don't know. Oh, I'll talk about that in a second. That's my favorite new tool. So my favorite book to share with you today is a book called The Judas Goat by Robert B. Parker. He wrote, I think, about 12 million Spencer novels. And now people have inherited his books, and now they're writing more Spencer novels, even though they're not Robert Parker. In any case, really interesting character. As happens with many of these series where you go on and on and on, it gets less interesting and sort of formulaic. This thing is it's a very slim book. Just a tiny little book. And it's one of those books where every word counts. It's really, really tight plot. I just loved it. Really, really interesting and kind of sweet book. So I encourage you to check it out. And I learned just by doing the searching that, oh my God, they actually made a movie of it. So I might have to go look that up, even though I generally don't watch television. And I urge all of you to not watch television. So check out The Judas Goat. It's a mystery thriller type book. And I wanted to share with you my favorite new tool. I've just ordered it. I haven't gotten it yet, but it's one of a series of similar tools that are used to pull out invasive saplings. It's called the Extractigator. So I've got weed wrenches.
Great name.
Yeah, it's a really cool name. Yeah. I've got an uprooter. I've got a puller bear, and they're all good, but they have some kinks, especially getting it. Anyway, I'm looking forward to trying this one out. Only $150. Nice.
I had a similar tool like that for dandelions a few years ago, but I decided to give up on dandelions and let them take over my lawn. So my neighbors love me.
They're beautiful, and you can eat it. What more could you ask for?
Not that beautiful when they turn into these just little sticks of it, but it's fine. No, I've made peace.
You know, that's all cultural, right? It's all what we're taught. I mean,
absolutely.
I grew up on Long Island. We had a third of an acre, and it was almost all lawn. My dad loved his lawn. Guess who mowed it? I hated the lawn, and he hated dandelions. So of course, I grew up hating dandelions. The leaves look bad. It's all what we're
absolutely
taught to believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, let them go. Okay, so favorite book. We're going to give money to help the people of Ukraine. What else we got?
There's one Rachel, more. There will be a blog post. Sorry, you can always catch the replay if you want to.
Yeah, you'll catch the video, and I still have to write the blog post, so it'll be a couple of days before that's out. And Judith has a comment also. Yes. That's so. Is this for the?
This was about when you were talking about the memory allocation for the variables and whether or not varchar 2600 was going to use less or more.
I'll have to look. I don't think that's true. I think it was smaller than that, but I'll take a look, Judith, and confirm. Chances are you're right, Judith, because you stay on top of this stuff better than I do, but I'll take a look. I did think it was smaller. But of course, with computers and memory getting bigger and cheaper, maybe they decided to up it because it really doesn't matter to anybody, except things get better. All right, so thanks for joining us. Hope you learned something new. I appreciate the comments and the engagement. Enjoy your time inside your computer box because it's so much better, even when it's awful, than stuff outside your box, except for when you put your box down, put your screens down, and you go outside and spend time in your planet, which is way better for you and more important than any code you will ever write, I believe. So reconnect, be in your world, don't be inside our boxes, and take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay masked, get vaccinated if you haven't already. Do not let your guard down yet. The virus is not done with us. Thank you.
On that happy note, see you next time. Bye, everyone.